The Buddha doesn't teach what is or what isn't. The Buddha teaches why something is and how does it bring consequences. So Kamma itself is not. It is only a cause and effect. So it doesn't stay somewhere. It doesn't have to stay anywhere because it is only a cause and effect which are always conditioned. So the idea that something must be somewhere in a certain way is an idea that is not in conformity with the reality. So in the reality, we have a cause and we have an effect. So there is an action and there is a consequence. If there is a good action, then there is a good consequence. If there is a bad action, then there is bad consequence. So there is no need for Kamma to be stored anywhere. So the simile for Kamma, which doesn't bring the result immediately, but brings a consequence later. So let's say somebody gives, but they immediately don't become rich. Let's say there is a poor person and they are generous, whatever they get, they give. So they do not become rich immediately. They may become rich later in their life or maybe next life, but until then, nobody can see that they were donating. So the process is likened to burning a pile of leaves. So if you have a large pile of leaves and you start burning it at one end, then actually the pile of leaves will continue to burn even if you do not see the fire. It burns from inside. And then as it burns from inside, as gradually the core of that pile is burned, then it starts to burn outside. So then the pile of leaves, all of it, burns down, even though you couldn't see how that fire actually burnt it all. So this is used for bad deeds, how bad deeds bring consequence, but not immediately. So if somebody does a bad deed, then they may not suffer immediately, but they will suffer in the future. So the fire of the bad deed gradually will burn him as the time goes, but they may not experience it immediately after the bad action. So the Kamma is there, it is there, but it is not like saved somewhere. It is not stored somewhere. It's the way how the world works, that there is a cause and there will be the consequence. When we do something, sometimes the effect takes time to come about. It is difficult to show it in the visible world, because when we do something physically or chemically, we can see that the results are there gradually, starting from the time when the consequence started. But the Buddha has taught that there are different kinds of conditions in the Abhidhamma Pitaka, in Patthana, which is a scripture of Theravada Buddhism. There is explanation on 24 conditions, and these 24 conditions, or causal relations as they are called in Pali, Patthanas, contain these different kinds of causes and effects. So there are causes and effects which are dependent on the skillful, unskillful deeds. There are causes and effects which are dependent on the object of that, what we see, hear, smell, and so on. There are causes and conditions where that what is in the past, that will make a condition for that what's in the future. Sometimes it is that what will be in the future, which is the condition for that what is now in the present. Sometimes there are causes and conditions which are simultaneous. Sometimes there are conditions which are mutually supporting each other. Sometimes there is the condition of presence, so of something that is present so that something else can happen. There is sometimes a condition for something to be absent so that something else can happen, and so on and so on. So there are different causes and different conditions, and one of them is the condition of a deed, of a good, bad deed, kamma paccaya. And this kamma paccaya is not alone there. There is also vipaka paccaya. So that's the condition for the result. Kamma is the action, vipaka is the result. So the Buddha has taught these 24 causal relations. Some of them are there several times as an emphasis, but in recitation there are 24. And one of them is this condition of an action for a consequence in terms of one's actions. The Buddha has explained different details about Kamma. Always Kamma is about cause and effect. Kamma is never stored anywhere. And it will be very difficult to understand how Kamma is available to bring about consequence when it is not been committed, when it's already committed in the past. But that's the way how the Buddha explains it. The Buddha explains there is a cause and then there is an effect. We can, however, add to this an interesting information that not every kamma needs to be repaid. Not every kamma needs to be repaid. There is so much of kamma that cannot be repaid and that will never be repaid. But this is only for the fully enlightened persons. So what we do can bring consequence in 3 periods. One is right after our action. Second is later during that life. And the third is in a next life. And if somebody becomes fully enlightened this life, then they will not be born anymore. So of course all of the kamma, all of the consequences that they would have to suffer for their previous deeds are basically cancelled by passing into nibbana. So the idea that it is stored and therefore it must be brought about back is not exactly working anyway, because if it was stored, it would not be possible to eradicate it through enlightenment. So there must be a cause, and therefore there will be an effect. If the cause is not fulfilled, then the effect will not happen. So that's why the Buddha says, if this is, that is. If this arises, that arises. If this is not, that is not. If this doesn't arise, that doesn't arise. So it's always about a cause and effect. Only in this kamma and similar cases, we may not be able to trace exactly how that cause is causing the effect, when and how and why. Also, interestingly, you can read the Lonakapalla Sutta, which is in Samyutta Nikaya. It is one of the discourses where the Buddha explains the workings of Kamma. And in this sutta, the Buddha suggests that it is possible to reduce the consequence of one's own actions. So the Buddha gives the simile of a lump of salt. So the Buddha asks monks, if you throw a lump of salt in a little cup of water, will the water become salty because of that lump of salt? And the monks say, yes, Venerable Sir, because there is a little bit of water in the cup. Then the Buddha continues, well, then if you throw that same lump of salt into the river Ganges, will the river Ganges become salty because of that one lump of salt? And the monks say, no, Venerable Sir, the river will not become salty because of one lump of salt, because there is so much of water. And the Buddha then goes on to explain that if somebody does a little bad deed, but does not engage themselves in good deeds, then that bad deed may bring very unpleasant consequences in this life and even take that person to hell in the next life. Yet another person may commit the same little bad deed, but because they have a huge amount of good deeds, they will experience the consequences only a little bit in this life, and it will have no impact on the next life. So it seems that it's possible to reduce the consequences of our deeds of our bad deeds through the amount of good deeds. So again, if it was stored, then it's difficult to imagine that it would be possible, to like almost eliminate it, because if it was stored, then certainly it would be there, so we cannot do anything with it. There is a story that I narrated today in the morning about several evil beings, evil humans, such as fishermen and thieves. And when they were going to die, they took the 3 refuges and in some cases also 5 precepts from a monk. And with their mind so delighted, so happy, so peaceful, even though they would be a fisherman or robbers, they were able to be born in heaven, just because they took the 3 refuges and 5 precepts. And the rationale here is that when somebody is going to pass away, the last thoughts, if they have an opportunity to have thoughts, will determine what will be their next life. It's not necessarily the actions from the previous times in their life. So if they were stored, then certainly it would be the powerful actions, the powerful bad actions or good actions, which would determine the next life. But it's not true. It's the last thoughts of the life that will determine the next life. But of course, in the next life, if there are no thoughts at the end of the next life, then whatever are the previous actions, then they will cause the consequence. So let's say, for example, these robbers or the fishermen may be born in heaven for some time, but when they pass away, they may go to hell directly. So the actions are there, but it's difficult to say that they would be stored. It's just that there is a potentiality. So if there is a potential, then there is a possibility that the potential will have an effect. If the potential is missing or if it is too weak, then we cannot rely on that effect.